right, good afternoon. My name is Celeste Arrington. I'm the director of the GW Institute for Korean Studies, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our latest Jaipil lecture series event. Given that today is a snow day, I want to thank Peter, our speaker, as well as the GWIC staff, Ravina Ugale, the program manager, and Takara Askew, the program coordinator, for being flexible, for shifting gears to this online format, and also to you, our audience, for being flexible about the format today. It is my great pleasure to welcome Peter Moody as our speaker today. The Jaipil lecture series we named in honor of a GW alum, one of the first Koreans to get American citizenship, who got his medical degree at GW and was a independence champion, champion of Korean independence. Our Jaipil lecture series aims to showcase up-and-coming research in Korean studies, academic research. And I think there's no better way than to showcase our postdoctoral fellow, the Korea Foundation postdoctoral fellow, Peter Moody, today in his research. He's a visiting scholar and a postdoctoral fellow here at GWIC this year. He's also been leading the undergraduate research fellows program, and I see a few of your research fellows in today's Zoom call, so thank you for joining us. He is a graduate of the doctoral program at Columbia University, and has also been serving this year as the managing editor of the Journal of Korean Studies. And he has also taught as a visiting research professor at Korea University. He brings a great wealth of Korean studies expertise to today's talk, and as you could see from the title, his book is currently focused on the role of music in revolutionary ideology in North Korea. And today he'll be presenting on a portion of this book project, and we look forward to his research, hearing about his research. And as you're listening, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box. But otherwise, let me turn it over to you, Peter. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me on this snow day. I'm sorry we couldn't do this in person. Maybe there'll be some kind of opportunity to do something that in the future. But maybe some of you that couldn't join in person are now able to see this. So there are advantages and disadvantages to having a Zoom platform for this lecture. All right, so let me share my screen with everyone. I got to make sure I put share sound. Okay, so here we go.
북한이 김정은 총비서를 찬양하는 새로운 체제 선전가요를 내놨습니다. 뮤직비디오도 공개를 했는데 이전에 나온 영상들과는 분위기가 많이 달라 보입니다. 정혜경 기자입니다. 미춘이를 비롯해 조선중앙TV 아나운서들이 엄지를 지켜들고 방역복을 입은 이들은 율동을 합니다. 북한이 최근 김정은을 찬양하는 내용의 새 선전가요 친근한 어버이와 함께 선보인 일종의 뮤직비디오입니다. 김정은이 총애하는 김명식 해군 사령관이 노래를 부르고 고려항공 승무원과 공장 일꾼 등 여러 직군들이 등장합니다. 백발의 할머니부터 아이까지 나오는데 연출에 공을 들인 흔적이 역력합니다. 북한으로선 나름 파격적인 연출을 시도한 건데 젊은 세대를 겨냥한 것으로 풀이됩니다. 이른바 장마당 세대들이 한류 콘텐츠 등 외부 문화를 접하면서 눈높이가 높아진 상황에서 김정은의 어버이 이미지를 정착시키기 위해 선전 선동 기법을 진화시키고 있다는 겁니다. 북한이 최근 김일성 생일을 태양절이라고 부르지 않는 등 김정은이 선대의 그늘에서 벗어나려는 움직임을 보이고 있는 것과 관련이 있다는 분석도 나옵니다. 북한에는 김정일을 상징하는 노래인 친근한 이름이라는 곡이 있는데 이 노래를 대체하면서 김정은을 띄우는 의미가 있다는 겁니다.
친근한 이미지를 만든다 이런 의미를 훨씬 넘어서는 게 김정일을 대체할 만한 이미지를 만들기 위해서 그건 보급하고 만들었다라고 봐야 되는 거고
노동신문은 새 선전가요가 폭풍 같은 반향을 일으켰다고 주장했지만 북한 전문 매체 데일리 NK는 구시대적 가요에 청년들은 큰 감흥을 느끼지 못하고 있다고 평가절하했습니다. SBS 정혜경입니다.
That was for lack of a better description, propaganda pop song from North Korea that was released last year. And what was striking to me about this was I mean, even though this was a song dedicated to the leader, it featured people from all walks of life and had them doing certain hand gestures that people maybe would associate more with a communist, non-dictatorship as opposed to North Korea. And but the big news story that got global attention was not the song itself, but the fact that this song suddenly went viral on TikTok. And I was interviewed initially for this BBC, and just because I agreed with a TikTok user that I think it sounded like ABBA, I was inundated with all these interview requests after that. And so you can imagine how shocked some people were that the people were doing this. But my major goal, one of my goals in doing the interviews, was to prevent some kind of mass panic. There's no evidence that this was a deliberate move by the North Korean government to spread its propaganda. Instead, its popularity is more incidental or just a consequence of the algorithm. And and it just I think the popularity of it traces back to a video of this person from Thailand, I believe, who was doing a K-pop dance with the music playing in the background. Most of the people sharing it had no idea what it meant. They just found the sound of it fresh and different compared to what they were listening to, but still familiar enough to be somewhat interesting to them. But if the reporting is to believe, there were disparate views and sentiments of this song within North Korea. But my goal today is to go back into North Korean history, specifically the 1960s and the early 1970s, to uncover the origins of, or at least a pivotal period in North Korean national identity construction through music. In doing so, I intend to utilize a prevalent frame that we hear a lot about in US politics and culture, if not global society, identity politics. But rather than decrying a perceived dominance of these discrete, immutable categories of people that are supposedly prevalent in modern academia and the corporate world, I use the term identity politics to balance against the largely singular notion of personality cult politics in studies of North Korean ideology and mass culture. This is not to say that the personality cult does not exist in North Korea. As we can see in that video right there, as we could see, it is alive and well. However, I would argue that these two are in relationship with each other, and that the personality cult cannot function in North Korea without the provision of some kind of buy-in for DPRK citizens. There has been financial and material buy-in, such as gifts from the Korean Workers' Party or gifts from the leader. But in times of scarcity, which is a chronic condition in DPRK, sometimes more severe than others, emotional incentives have often compensated for financial incentives, with music playing a critical role in the process. So, in short, what I identify as musical populism and lyrical affective transfer through the DPR government, through its vast state ideological apparatus of cultural labor strive to make the political personal. In other words, the pivotal moment, or rather pivotal process that I trace, is when the state accommodated to popular taste and private predilections to foster voluntary compliance with the state's initiative. A second argument that I make is that, at least in the modern world, and this is a more global argument, national identity is indispensable to state power. And that critical to the cementing of that state power in the DPRK was the creation of a new national, uniquely North Korean group identity. So I'm going to briefly explain the counters and parameters of my book project and how this particular chapter fits into it. After that, I will look at early attempts and contestations over how precisely to establish a national identity in the North in a cultural form. And following that, I will discuss the emergence of the concept of the revolutionary song, songs that originated or harken back to the anti-Japanese resistance movement in the Manchurian region during the Japanese colonial period, the borrowing of commercial genres of music from the Japanese colonial period to appeal to popular taste. And finally, I will examine the beginnings of revolutionary operas in North Korea that were, for the lack of a better description, they were elite music for the masses. So in doing so, I will zero in on their lyrical and music properties, as well as how they and other similarly situated music became classics of a new indigenous identity in the North. So one issue in this book project that I'm working on called Mobilizing Musicians in the Making of North Korea is the national versus the international aspects of North Korean music. Since North Korea's founding, there has been ongoing dialectic between preserving indigenous features on the one hand and updating them to suit modern international society on the other. Another issue that I look at are the two core functions of North Korean music, which is termed within the North Korean society, weapon of the revolution and companion for daily life. So previous research has largely focused on this weapon of the revolutionary side, the ideological aspect of North Korean music. But in DPRK sources, music is also portrayed as a resource that responds to people's everyday needs, that responds to their changes and preferences over time, and is something that enhances their quality of life. So I aim to capture this other side, which in North Korean terms is typically called inminsong, which is translated in North Korean dictionaries as serving the people spirit. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, I shed lights on the perspectives of musicians, documenting through their writings what they have to say about their music practices and the society in which they live. Sometimes there are debates and disagreements among different musicians, and reading between the lines can provide indications or at least suggestions of what they had to struggle with. So for this chapter that I'm going to talk about today, chapter 4, tentatively called From Revolutionary Songs to Revolutionary Operas, there are not as many different voices as there are in other chapters, because by this time, the practices and principles surrounding music have converged to a large degree. However, there are indications, or at least there are unexpected emissions. Sorry, that's what I meant to say. They were unexpected emissions and suggestions of debates taking place, even if they are not documented directly. So, now I would like to talk about the theoretical framework for this chapter and to a large extent my work as a whole. And this is something that I am working on strengthening right now. So if you have any questions or thoughts, feel free to suggest them. So it's the concept of mass dictatorships. Now, mass dictatorships has been theorized and applied to history as well as contemporary politics in a number of ways. But I am drawing specifically on the perspective of someone who I found most helpful, which is Jae-hyun Lim, and his 2005 outlining of the concept of mass dictatorship. So Jae-hyun Lim, from my understanding, is someone who witnessed and experienced to a certain extent the democratization of two places on opposite sides of the Cold War divide. In Korea around 1987 and in Poland shortly after that. So one of his aims is to distance or try to push back against this notion of Cold War dualism, that something like a mass dictatorship is only possible on the other side of the Cold War divide, meaning only in a communist society or only in a capitalist society. Another idea that a historical perspective that he pushes back on is the notion that in a totalitarian society, or it's the mechanism of power is just a dictator, his top cronies versus the rest of society. So mass dictatorship looks at the aspect of participation through a broader spectrum of the population. So it can be distinguished with something that he identifies as pre-modern despotism. So in Lim's view, pre-modern despotism can function without backing from below. But in the 20th century, especially, there was a replace dominance of a liberal bourgeoisie that could be dominant in a largely agricultural society with increasing urbanization and labor organization, which opens the door to a mass society. So in other words, there's a potential critical mass of workers, our citizens within urban spaces. And if you don't effectively mobilize that population democratically or through some sort of populist appeal, then someone else will. And so, with that in mind, a mass dictatorship requires mass backing from below in order to be functional. And so rather than thinking of as merely a tyranny over the masses, it functions as a tyranny through the masses. And this resembles Louis Althusser's notion of the the state ideological apparatus. It's not just the repressive apparatus, but also ideological advantage. And this could either be through civil society or through organizational activity, such as in the case of North Korea. Another way to envision the distinction is that pre-modern despotism functions primarily through external coercion. On the other hand, a mass dictatorship functions, at least to some degree, through internal coercion, through the structuring of thought and feeling. And this could take place over years and through decades, as opposed to with a single break. And so I connect this idea of mass dictatorship with something that is in a lot of different discourses today, which is identity politics. I think it connects to this internal coercion of through structuring thought and feeling. But what I mean specifically, which is not reflected in the PowerPoint right now, is some kind of victim slash survival narrative, which can overshadow or stymie a broader structural critique. Okay, so this notion that there are these identities that have this us and them, and but perhaps not shining a light on the whole picture. Okay, and in short, it can become a distraction for the mechanisms of power that are really taking place. Okay, so um, at the beginning of the North Korea state founding, 1948, as the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the Soviet civil administration, which until that point was ruling indirectly through co-opting the people's committees that were set up right after liberation, issued a report on society and politics and culture north of the 38th parallel. And one thing that they were looking at is to what extent was the North Korea society at the time reflecting general transnational Soviet state socialist practices. And one of those was national spirit, a component of socialist realism. It could be referred to as minjoksung in Korea or narodnost in Russian. So this was this idea that you are showing that you are the true national, as opposed to cosmopolitan, representative of the people, and then doing so in festivals and cultural exchanges with the Eastern Bloc in the spirit of proletarian internationalism. So, despite the largely positive impression that SCA is coming away with from North Korean society, one of the author of the port issues this soft criticism. When it comes to North Korean musicians, most of them prefer the so-called light genre, like light music genre. And this is big band and not quite jazz music, but music with horns, largely instrumental for the purpose of dancing. And this was very popular in the colonial period. And there are also instances when they plagiarize other composers. They have thus not shown much interest in creating, quote, classic works of music, unquote. And several musicians and composers have been overwhelmed about doubts about their capacity to create such works. So, as an example of someone who was overwhelmed with these doubts, the report cites the figure Ri Myung-sang. And Ri Myung-sang was a prolific writer of music during the colonial periods of the so-called light genres, but he did not have experience so much with indigenous Korean music as well as opera. So this is what he says when he was interviewed by the SCA. Our composers have never even seen operas and hardly know anything about them. So I don't think we will be able to compose them for quite some time. So for this, we can see that these classic works of music, one might call them great classic works of music as they are identified in other sources, specifically referred to operas. But Korea did not have an indigenous tradition of opera. They had something similar, which was changguk, which stage pansori. But so far, the particulars of it were largely in the South and had not really moved to the North at the time. So from this, we can see that there was some concern that Koreans, musicians in the North, had not effectively decolonized yet. With decolonization, mean they are able to express their traditions in a rich, classic form that other countries in the Eastern Bloc could enjoy. So flash forward after the Korean War, the imperative of national spirit, 민족성, is just as important, but for a different reason. At this time, during the post-Korean War reconstruction, during which North Korea receives massive support from Eastern European countries, there is an impression, at least expressed by Kim Il-sung at the time, that there was not enough focus on indigenous Korean culture. In other words, you might say that there was too much proletarian internationalism. Because at the time when a lot of representatives, workers from other countries are coming in to deliver aid and participate in building projects, there is favorable coverage of the culture of the fraternal socialist countries. I believe on Bulgaria's national holiday, there was a Bulgarian music being played for a long period of time on North Korean radio. So this creates some anxiety among many in the North Korean political leadership that that young people scarcely knew what their own culture was, and instead were more interested in foreign music and even foreign fashion more than they were about Korean cultural identity and Korean heritage. So this makes up a big part of what has since then been called the Juche speech. At the time, it wasn't really called the Juche speech. It was called so against dogmatism and revisionism in ideological work. That's a paraphrase of it. But Kim Il-sung uses the term juche, which you could just translate roughly as subject at the time, asking what is the subject in ideological works? What are the national Korean characteristics in the way that we are creating, constructing the socialist society? So he called for the systemic study of Korean history and national culture in order to, quote, unearth national legacies and carry them forward. So what does this mean in the context of music? So this is when the discourse of national music in Korean, 민족 음악, becomes very prevalent. So what this referred to is A, passing down the cultural heritage of the people, folk traditions that ordinary people presumably sung and listened to, and then developing it as in a way that fits the present reality, and ideally at that time to power socialist industrialization. And so there are a number of different cultural works and music that came out of that, such as some stage pansori changguk. There was a Chunhyang The Tale of Chunhyang. There were stage productions of that. There were also zither playing ensembles and the sanjo, which is an indigenous kind of music played on solo instruments. But the issue for North Korea politicians at the time is that most of the practitioners of these Korean traditional music genres were from the South. Okay, they had migrated from the South to the North because they thought that the North would cultivate the Korean music heritage more than the South. Because at the initial stage of the U.S. military occupation in the South, there wasn't so much interest in this kind of cultivation of indigenous music. But even before this, there are voices outside of the traditional music establishment that are calling for greater adaptation of the concept of national music. On the one hand, with the death of Stalin and the Soviet Union, there was some degree of cultural de-Stalinization with respect to, and we've seen this before, the light musical genre. Big band, even if jazz, with its association with America, making jazz specifically out of the question. So, for example, this instrumentalist here, Lee Guan Mo, he wrote a piece called Resolving to Revive the Popular Spirit of Light Music. And at this time, he makes a tacit, if not, you may interpret it as a direct criticism of the party for not cultivating the light musical genres more. He claims that when he was on a train practicing, there were some young people that complimented what he was doing and said that he wished more of the party sponsored events had this kind of music. It gave him a lot of energy to go about his daily life, his everyday activities. And and then other works at the time said that it's a mistake to say that light musical genres cannot be a part of national music. That the tango, for instance, is, even though it's a national, even though it's a light genre of music, it is a Latin American indigenous national genre of music as well. And so there's no reason that one cannot express indigenous identity through music forms that are somewhat borrowed from other countries. And so around this time, there are numerous songs with titles such as Cheerful Construction Site that endeavored to make people feel energy and give people time, recreation time in the middle of work shifts. So this is a dilution of the concept of national music. At the same time, there was a containment of Korean national musicians, and as I indicated before, these national musicians were the top figures were largely from the South. And so this is something that Kim Il Sung said in the speech 1964. Certain comrades have said that Namdo Chang, which can be literally translated as Southern province music or songs, should be a fundamental part of national music. However, and this is Kim Il Sung's claim, not mine, such songs derive from tunes that had once served as the former Yangban aristocracy's drinking songs, and therefore do not resonate well with the people. Particularly Pansori, the husky voice, is horrid to listen to. When performed by beautiful young women, it is a complete contradiction of natural and scientific vocalization methods. Okay, so then there was the emergence of something called the revolutionary song, and these were songs that were either unearthed from the Japanese colonial period at the during the Manchurian anti-Japanese guerrilla struggle, or were newly written to harken back around that time. And so this is one of them called March of the Guerrillas. Let me just play it just a second. All right. So when I listen to this, instead of sounding like a militant march, it sounds more like a drinking song. And so this perhaps is no accident, because the purpose of the music of this time was to provide space for people to enjoy music revolution that had revolutionary content. But interestingly enough, the music was not original. Here's where the music came from. So, as many of you could guess by now, this song was a Japanese song that was popular earlier in the 20th century. And so, as Kim Il-sung openly acknowledges, that a lot of the music that took place that was written in the 1930s for the guerrilla revolutionaries was not newly composed works, but just writing lyrics for songs that people were already familiar with. And so that, when I read another historical account of this from Northeast China, that account said that these uh, revolutionary songs at the time, one reason they drew on them is so they could communicate music faster, communicate political messages faster through songs people already knew. And so this kind of opens up the door for North Korea to appropriate music from other countries, and also a broader appropriation of the colonial legacy. So within that same speech that I showed before, 1964, the way it's translated in English is really interesting. Kim Il-sung states, we can continue to sing these croon type songs, the crooner songs. I'm not sure how they came to that translation, but what he's specifically talking about is the yuhanga. These are commercial music from the colonial period. A lot of them are very desolate and forlorn sounding. But he said there are certain songs that are more cheerful. And even the songs that do sound sad, they deplore the corrupt song of the time. And in any case, the healthy-minded masses are fond of singing them, so it's okay to draw on them. Just as an example of this, well, two examples. One is the Shin Minyo, and it's actually supposed to say new folk song, and the Yuhenga popular song. New folk songs were songs played with Western instruments, but still had a folk sounding melody. Yuhenga on the other side hand is what Kim Il-sung is referring to here, the croon type songs. Let's listen to an example of this. This is a song called Grounds of the Ruined Castle. And this song is from the 1930s.
밤이 되니 월색만 고요해 비오에서는 햇불을 말아여 주노나.
So in the interest of time, I'm going to move forward. But even though this song is literally about the end of the Goryeo period, and sitting at the grounds of a ruined castle in Gaesong, in present-day North Korea, it was indirectly a sign that was expressing tragic sentiments about the end of the Joseon dynasty. So that's something that I'll return to later, and I'll show you an example of how North Korea drew on that song musically. So in late 1964, Kim Il-sung delivered a speech saying that great progress had been made in creating works with themes of socialist construction, but more had to be done to highlight so-called revolutionary tasks. So he makes the speech that I drew on before, and then shortly after the speech, the Central Committee of the League of Korean Musicians outlined its agenda for fulfilling the call for more revolutionary works. So these terms, revolutionary content, popular in form, are my approximations. But the descriptions here is what is from the text. Okay, so what does revolutionary content mean? It means archetypes that embody the three things: the Liberation War, meaning the Korean War, the anti-Japanese armed struggle of the 1930s, and the contemporary, at the time at least, the South Korean people's uh, quote anti-American struggle to save the people. So that is the content, and what I argue is the base of the creation of the new North Korean national identity. But the way in which this identity would be circulated was through music that was popular in form, easy listening quality, short length, no more than a 10-note vocal range, and should have combativeness, but also national characteristics. So at the same in a article that was written in response to the Central Committee meeting, the vice chairman wrote that there was a need to enlarge the state. Sorry, not enlarge the state, but enlarge the stage for great revolutionary works that portray the lives of great revolutionaries. So these end up being part of the 5 revolutionary operas. And the 5 revolutionary operas, in my mind, are the North Korea's regime's attempts to balance two somewhat contradictory notions of party spirit and serving the people spirit. Quote, serving the people spirit. Party spirit refers to an unceasing loyalty to the party and all of its policies. On the other hand, serving the people spirit refers to reflecting the interest of the masses and encouraging them to realize their ambitions. How does this happen? This happens through musical populism, drawing on music that people are actually listening to rather than the music that's being forced upon them, and then lyrical affective transfer. And I won't have time to show that today, but that's when you start a song in the first verse with something vague and something that a situation that can happen in someone's daily life, such as one's relationship with one's biological parent. And then by the second or the third verse, those affective, uh, personal affective qualities are transferred to an experience that Kim Il sung had. Perhaps, for example, he had with his parents during the Manchurian anti-Japanese guerrilla struggle. And so it's a way to strengthen the notion of an identity politics towards what might be called a guerrilla spirit, in contrast to what was previously called the working class spirit, defending the interest of the labor classes with socialism through the operas, 3 of 5 of which focus on the colonial period, are set in the colonial period, are directly envision that guerrilla struggle within the 1930s. And so the last thing that I'm going to show you in relation to the musical populism is how songs from the colonial period, even if they were songs of commercial record industries, have striking similarities. So we just heard Grounds of the Ruined Castle. I'll read the lyrics here. At night, the old palace site is quiet. Only the moonlight is shining. I tell you about the sorrow that lies in the ruins. Ah, the lonely traveler alone cannot sleep. I cry silently at the sad sound of insects. So as I indicated before, this song is indirectly mourning the fall of the Joseon Kingdom. And so let's listen to a present day North Korean version. the same song that we heard before, just a North Korean version of it. And the operas, the revolutionary operas, were ostensibly created for popular audiences with their catchy melodies, elaborate stage design, dance numbers, and stanzaic or repeating verse form that's characteristic of popular music. But the arias also resemble the colonial era Yuhanga, such as the popular song that we just heard, with their minor key and solemn wandering melodies. And they also focus on ordinary people as protagonists, with Kim Il sung for the most part in the background rather than the foreground. They therefore embodied a revolutionary identity politics more than the personality cult. And this was so much the case that Kim Jong Il, Kim Il sung's son, who largely become a leader in the cultural field by this time, he was very critical. He gave a critical criticism of this opera here, which was The True Daughter of the Party. This was about a nurse in the Korean War who strives to become an honorable party member. So even though it did focus on the ordinary people as protagonists, he thought that didn't focus enough on his father. So he said, creators, you didn't honor my father enough in the plot line. So I recommend an extra song and will try to write the lyrics for it myself. The song should be about a heroine searching for the general after going through a hardship and only finding dark rocks. So this is the song right here. Where are you, dear general, from True Daughter of the Party? And as you can see here, there are notable similarities in the lyrics. It's about looking up at the sky, the moonlight is shining, and as we can see there, as we will see, there are similar musical qualities as well. So let's listen to the first and second verse of it.
내가 이렇게 울고 있는 것을 일성수 북두칠성수 물리 혈은 밝은데 아버지
So in that voice, you can sense the wandering melody, the minor key, which is a characteristic of the Yuhanga, as well as these lyrics that are very forlorn as she is looking for the father general, meaning Kim Il sung at the time. And you also have an ambience with the darkness and but having the light just providing some sort of light despite the darkness. But when that offstage chorus comes in, it it provides a sense of what's taking place inside of her head. Like that's the function of it. So way beyond the enemy lights and the dark forest, where's their general? The more the autumn wind that cold blows, the more I miss his warm embrace. And so what North Korea attempts to do is they're resolving the song, turning it into a song of forlorn quality, into a song that expresses some hope about the future. Okay, so that is all of my presentation today. It's not the full chapter, but I look forward to any questions that I can discuss it in a larger context. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. That was a fascinating discussion, and as a political scientist, of course, I'm very intrigued by the idea that music plays a role in the autocrat's ability to build legitimacy and gain, as you say, buy-in from the people. I apologize for my own musical background going on here with my daughter practicing piano, but let me open it up. Remind the audience that you should put questions in the Q&A box, and I will happily field those for Peter. As we're waiting for questions to come in, I did want to take the moderator's prerogative and ask you a little bit about how we can know the reception of these revolutionary songs or operas, and in a sense, this perpetual question with North Korea, like what do the ordinary citizens think about it? And I see the tension in some of the documents and the speeches by elites that you quoted as trying to balance the revolutionary spirit with what the people want. But do you have any sense of like who was watching these operas, or how popular were the songs? Do they get repeated and then altered in, say, ordinary recordings in ways that you can get a sense of what the reception was?
So the North Korea regime, from the time of the beginnings of these revolutionary operas until very recently, if not today as well, makes an effort to make sure that the entire population is exposed to them. And so for people at Pyongyang, there will be regular performances, and people will attend the operas, usually through their work site or through their school, and not only viewing the operas, but also discussion afterwards to make sure they took the right message from the operas. And not only that, perhaps outside in the provinces, they have the local performance groups, the performance groups that are assigned to each work site will also perform them as well. And so people who have defected from North Korea have mentioned those songs gave them a sense of kind of humanized the regime. That's one quote that I heard from them, and so to make it seem like that you had a personal connection with the Korean Workers' Party and with the leadership, and yeah, and even when they were performed outside of Korea in Japan, ethnic Korean community there, the Chongyang community, also reported liking them. But what happens is, in North Korea, documents shed light on this, is that after they're performed so frequently, and after people have to listen to them every year, they could feel bland, and people could get tired of them. And maybe the younger people aren't as interested in them as the older people. And so then the regime has to innovate in some sense. So what that entailed in the 1980s was drawing on the pop music from capitalist countries, both with instrumentation, electric guitars, synthesizers, even if the goal was to make sure younger people were still interested in folk music, Korean folk music. And then even within the lyrics itself, some of the messages that promoted the party became more subtle and became diluted to some sense that made so they wouldn't have uh, such and people wouldn't have such an adverse reaction to them as if they would if the song was entirely political. So and those songs, once they were more diluted lyrical themes, such as a song about a wedding, and then suddenly right in the middle of it, the Workers' Party is good. Uh, People that are more my age or even younger have said that they enjoyed singing those songs even in karaoke, but the party messages weren't necessarily on their mind. So this is a constant dialectic between what I've identified as party spirit, making sure the song reflects the message and agenda of the party, and popular spirit to make sure that people are actually interested in it and listening to it. And so, and it's something that is not always easy to work out, and that's why you can have some disparate reactions and receptions to particular pieces of music.
Yeah, thank you. I think this segues pretty well into our first question from, it's an anonymous question. But the questioner asks, how did the musical shift from folk traditions to revolutionary operas reflect the broader political transformation?
Okay, so I think that's an excellent question. It's something that I didn't really touch on in this presentation, but I discuss in detail in my chapter. So in 1957, there is the um, 5-year work plan, and so that is largely industry development, heavy industrial development, and for the most for so it had some measure of success, even if there were issues with bottlenecks in certain industries. Uh, However, in the next economic plan, which was the 7-year plan, it started in 1960. The results, well, the problems in meeting the targets for the campaign were openly acknowledged in the Workers' Party newsletters, and uh, and so what I argue is that the revolutionary song was one way to make farmers and people in light industrial sectors envision themselves as more of a combat unit, and instead of just being a laborer or a farmer. And so by envisioning oneself as a fighter, as a soldier, through revolutionary sounding songs, uh, the idea at least was to make people more productive. At the same time, though, there is the last major purge to figures that uh, stand in political opposition to Kim Il sung. Uh, this is from within Kim's guerrilla faction. These were people that served alongside Kim Il sung, or were involved in guerrilla activity in other parts of Manchuria. So there was criticism about Kim Il sung shifting more towards defense objectives as opposed to economic objectives. And and by figures that were also revolutionary leaders. Pak Geum Chul is the main figure of this. And so politically, the supporters of Kim Il sung have to institute a political plan to make sure that no opposition such as that happens in the future. So this is the beginning of the monolithic uh, ideological system in which all the principles of the party become loyalty to Kim Il Sung. So by that point, there's no more pluralism with political and economic matters, although there's some debates regarding culture and music on stylistic matters, and so you can sense that the way that the North Korean regime thought was most practical towards strengthening the personality cult was not by focusing on music that is tied to this indigenous Korean peasant identity, but more tied to a guerrilla identity that musically is based on um, pop music from the colonial period, and so the revolutionary opera is the way to have a total art experience of uh, that objective because it's based on stage design, it's based on theater, it's based on music as well, and everyone is listening to it simultaneously. And so that I think is the primary mechanism through which the new national identity and the identity politics was manifest during that political transition. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Since you just ended on the opera, I'll take the questions a little bit out of order. This is a question from our NRC program manager, Lisa Lackney. And she asks, can you tell us more about your use of the term opera? When North Korean speakers use the term opera, what are they meaning? Are they referencing Western opera styles or just songs on a stage as you talk about the full artistic experience with stage design and a narrative arc, and then or are they or just songs on a stage? Basically, is this referring to Western opera styles or not? And then as a side note, she adds she can't help but notice how similar Grounds of the Ruined Castle sounds to Japanese enka music.
Okay, let me make sure that I write both of those down. Inca, opera plus Inca, because I don't want to forget to address the latter part of your question. So this is an excellent question, something that I was very curious about myself, and something that's not easily answered, both by me and by people that were at the time in North Korea who were engaging with the very issue that you talk about. So, in early North Korean text pertaining to culture, the terms opera in Hangul and kaguk are used interchangeably. But what does it mean? That's the $1 million question. And kaguk at the time was not uh, so much of what we refer to opera. It could refer to just a variety kind of stage performance, even if it would later be synonymous for opera. Uh, so, uh, but there was not a clear idea about how to create an indigenous opera form. And on the one hand, do you draw on the changuk? Changuk is stage pansori. Pansori, remember, is just a solo vocalist with a drummer. Okay, but the changuk just makes that into a stage drama. So was that the opera? Some composers made changuk adaptations. Uh, Others used European music, but made it a folk tale as um, the concept of the or the story, the content of it. And so it wasn't exactly clear. And so what I argue in my first chapter, when I look at the exploration of this operatic discourse, is that this issue wasn't resolved. It was postponed because of the larger needs of the Korean War. Then after the Korean War, the first aim was to draw on the Changguk, meaning the indigenous Korean stage drama musical form. And but this, because it draws a lot from pansori music, it did not win over the North Korean leadership. It's hard to know what the reception is of everyday people. Kim Il Sung claimed it wasn't revolutionary enough, and we got some sense of that before. After that, there was the national opera, or Minjok Kaguk, and that was music that sounded more like the Shin Minyo, the new folk songs from the Japanese colonial period, but with uh, themes and stories that are Korean folk tales. So you don't get a sense on what North Korean opera is until the creation and the cementing of this revolutionary opera form. And so, what North Korean discourse says is that previously opera was music that was for the elite, but Kim Jong Il has made it into music for a popular audience. And the way he did that was to cut out um, the parts of the music that are spoken dialogue but are not structured like a song, and then he also uh, and, used structures of popular songs for the arias, and so I think of North Korean revolutionary operas by that point, and also in the 1980s when there's more another phase of the national operas as music that resembles the colonial period, but with content of revolutionary ideology.
Thank you.
Oh,
Oh, go
Enka.
ahead. Enka,
Okay,
yeah.
for the same reason. Yuhenga in Korean, popular song, was some might say it was a copy or an indigenization of the Ryugoka. And Ryugoka has a lot of the same musical properties as Yuhenga, even if Koreans added new vocal practices to it. Uh, but and so North Korea drawing on that kind of form makes it so it's similar to sounding with Inca today.
Thank you. I'm going to take a question from one of our GWIX undergrad research fellows. Jasmine asks, musicians who came from the South and moved north, do you think that they played a significant role in influencing some of the music genres of North Korea? Or were some of these influences forgotten or even actively excluded over time?
Okay, I think the answer is both. Okay, and I try to address this question in the previous chapter called National Music. So I can probably share my screen with you just to show you this briefly, entire screen. So I think a lot of the music at the time has been forgotten, if not uh, just marginalized to a great extent. So the pansori, for instance, has all but done away with. Although another researcher in North Korea, Keith Howard, says that when he went to North Korea in the early 90s, he did hear pansori being performed. So for maybe diplomatic reasons or just because they want to make sure that the tradition is passed down, even if it isn't heard regularly. So, but any kind of music resembling South Korean vocal practices has has largely disappeared, even if not entirely. On the other hand, the instrumental music is a more complicated story. So the music, there was a lot of songs that pieces of music, I would say, that were similar to the sanjo. Sanjo is a indigenous Korean instrument and a percussion instrument performing together. But what happened is the music was shortened, and then there was also invented instruments so they could play with a Western orchestra. And so even if you don't have something that's precisely like the Sanjo form as before, there still is instrumental music that is strongly influenced by it. Particularly the Pyeongchang, which is parallel singing and playing the zither, the kayagum music. So this existed before North Korea, but it was largely solo, like a single instrumentalist singing. North Korea cemented it as an ensemble form that could express group unity. It was also used as a way to as a way to gender, to create these gendered representation of women who could sing in a clear and beautiful sound rather than the more husky sounding voice of South Korean folk songs. And so this has remained in North Korea, and especially in the overseas communities, Korean communities that maintain ties with North Korea. So, so yes, I would say that some of the music from the South Korean musicians has remained, even if it's been in an updated form. But other forms of music have largely disappeared.
If I might, as moderator, jump in here, do you see influences in songs going the other direction? So, say during the Minjung movement in the pro-democracy era, 70s and 80s in South Korea, were they adopting any of these revolutionary songs from the North?
Some suspect that they may have, some of the democracy activists. Uh, I believe there may have been one or two songs that were not um, explicitly about the Workers' Party or about Kim Jong-il. They were just more about themes of unification that were adopted by some of the democracy activists, perhaps without knowing that they were North Korean songs. And I do know, I've heard about a North Korean song called We Are One that was sung by South Korean democracy activists, at least a certain segment of them. But it was a South Korean indigenization of it. So instead of singing it with the rhythm that North Korea wrote the piece in, they were singing it in a trot kind of style, a South Korean popular music form style of the time. But that is something that I'd like to research a lot more. Uh, so there has been uh, influences across the border. It's just we are in the process of still uncovering that.
Yeah, I think it's a great research that you're doing on that. So we have about 10 more minutes, so feel free to add more questions to the Q&A. Let me take another anonymous question. The questioner asks, does the revolutionary content of these songs come more from the Kim family's influence on the nation or what North Korea faced during that period?
What period?
I'm presuming early state
Ah,
building in the 50s and
okay.
60s.
So the answer is both. There's a category of songs, the revolutionary songs, that are claimed to have been written by guerrilla figures. But some of them, as Kim Il Sung admitted, were just songs. Some of that were Japanese songs musically. They Some of them were Christian songs that the American missionaries introduced, but they're songs people were familiar with, and so that's why some of these revolutionary songs sound like hymns, and others sound like music from the commercial record industry during the colonial period. Uh, I'm sorry, what was the question again?
Um, to what extent is that the Kim's family's influence on
Oh,
these
okay.
songs
Yeah, yeah.
versus what people are facing in their daily lives?
Okay, yes, yes. Excellent question. And so that's for revolutionary songs and also some of songs that were influenced by the Yuhenga. Uh, However, a certain group of songs influenced by the Yuhenga that were just general expressions of sorrow uh, for the tribulations that people experienced during the colonial era um, were either appropriated or they were reproduced in the North. And I would say the Shin Minyo, the new folk song, that is another part of North Korean music culture that I think more research could be done on. Any time that I've heard about um, a concert of music from the ethnic Korean Chongnyeon community that maintain ties with North Korea, they have considerable number of Shinminyo in their performance. And the scholarly consensus about the Shinminyo is that they express themes about um, not all of them, but a lot of them express themes about liberation indirectly, poetically, using metaphors such as longing for the south, longing for south of the river. That was composed about the Yangtze River in Shanghai, but it has been interpreted to be about south of the Yalu River, um, so from China to the Korean Peninsula, dreaming of longing for Korea's independence. That's just one example of it. And so there is some openness and reception, sorry, openness and receptiveness of the North Korean leadership towards allowing these songs. And and so there's some indication that people were still singing them, and even a decade or two after the liberation from Japanese colonial occupation. There are also books written about songs from the colonial period that were released around the time when North and South Korea were engaging in music diplomacy with each other, and um, and perhaps that means that North Korea, at the time at least, it's perhaps they've given this up by now, were trying to seek some way to have a shared musical heritage between the North and South, rooted in music that derived or that came from the colonial experience.
Thank you. We have a question from Michael here who asks how much North Korean music has changed under Kim Jong-un. You mentioned the sort of popification of music with new types of instruments and rhythms and things like that. But I wonder if you could speak a little bit about the Kim Jong-un era.
So, as I indicated before, as far back as the 1980s, there are instances of North Korean drawing from pop music of capitalist countries, rock and disco specifically. And but at that time, according to defectors I've talked to and according to other researchers, the media that propagated the rock and disco versions of the songs was only accessible to people within the Pyongyang area. There were some defectors that heard about this music from the Chinese border. Ironically, they came in contact with it through music that was coming across the border from China, and some of them misrecognized it as Yanbian music, right? Uh, but for the most part, it was not music that ordinary people were exposed to outside of the Pyongyang metropole. However, during the Kim Jong Un period, uh, the music that draws from rock, disco, even dance. There's songs that sound like EDM music, right? Um, these are songs that the entire population is exposed to. They're on the North Korea television, and the groups have toured in different parts of Korea, in provincial areas as well as the center. I think that is the main difference. Another difference is that I think Kim Jong il, compared to Kim Jong un, was more interested in songs that have some trace to indigenous Korean heritage. With like New Folk Song is where that came from initially. But Kim Jong Un is more interested in appearing as modern, as um, some might even say cosmopolitan. In the early period, there were the bands did American songs, even South Korean songs, although those were the authorized music at the time. People couldn't access those music legally on their own, the foreign versions of the music, but they could listen to the North Korean bands playing those songs, and so that is a big shift. Uh, but yeah, I think that Kim Jong Un also had a more hands-on approach on kind of trusting the music practitioners to um, innovate stylistically, while Kim Jong Il was more personally involved in the process. Uh, but I think the whole practice that I identified as the dialectic between musical populism and party spirit is still very much um, in play, or it's taking place, and it's just gone into new categories of global pop music.
Thank you. Just in our final 2 minutes or so, this is a big question, so may not be fair. Kyung, one of our visiting scholars, asks, what were the careers of musicians like? Do some of them emerge as pop stars over time or become educators? Maybe if you want to focus on the Kim Jong-un era, since you just ended with that, or pick a
Well,
musician that you want to highlight. Go ahead in just a few
my book
minutes.
project is a quote unquote Cold War history. Uh, so I haven't written as much about the Kim Jong un period, although I am currently working on a piece about how pop ballads, like ballad songs, kind of adult contemporary soft pop music, suddenly became the most prevalent music in the pandemic period. So I didn't really focus on the career of musicians. I think you can distinguish between the creators, which are largely the composers, the lyricists, and the musicians. The the musicians, they do not have as much artistic or creative autonomy. Some of them, they do become professors at the elite music universities. They become practitioners, but they are largely these specimens, these representatives of state ideology. And so some of them do talk about how they came from a humble background, as working as one of their local music groups at the work site or at their school. And then the party leadership just came and discovered them and discovered their talent. And so then after that, they work full time as a registered artist of the state. They could appear in films, or they could appear in international exchanges. They could be involved in recordings. Then you have the composers, and initially, a lot of the composers studied abroad, either in the Soviet Union or in Japan during the colonial period, and so they are either recruited, or they take initiative to show someone in power a piece that they have written. There are also contests to try to pick out some amateur composers and cultivate them as professional practitioners. Uh, Lyricists are more poets. Okay, they come from a literature background, and they either collaborate directly with the composers, or they just write, or their poems that they have written are turned into music later. So they're not really involved they don't really have a music career per se. Uh, but the composers certainly do. And in the period that I focus most of my analysis on and most of my research on, the 50s and the 1960s, the composers were largely an autonomous unit. And even if they were under political pressure from the party at all times. And so they had meetings with each other, they had debates, and they had profound disagreements. And one of the disagreements, I didn't show you the kind of behind the scenes of what's taking place, but in short, it's a flexible understanding of what indigenous national culture is in North Korea. And the pop musicians from the colonial periods are the ones that went out over the indigenous Korean musicians.
So unfortunately, we are out of time, but I regret to say that we have two more excellent questions in the Q&A box. So definitely look at those, Peter. But please join me, I guess, in our webinar format in thanking Peter for his fascinating presentation today. As Kyung just mentioned, this was a fabulous presentation, which raised lots of interesting questions in my mind, and I hope it did in all of yours. I hope that you're able to join us at future GWIX events, and I want to thank Peter for today's presentation. So thank you very much. This concludes our webinar.